Interesting. So I haven't done an Instagram live before, and I think I'm gonna wait a second. My name's Will, obviously, Will Blair. I want everyone to ask questions. I like to talk, so I'll get rolling when I get rolling here, but ask questions. I'll tell you a little of the stories of Kamchatka, and if you can use a question button, that would be great. So it's interesting. I was thinking about, I was watching, I don't really watch a lot, or I still read some fishing stuff quite a bit, but hello, Chile. I was thinking about it because people often ask me, how did you start going to Kamchatka? And I was a fishing guide in Alaska on the Upper Nushagak, and was up there, loved it, wilderness camp, great trout fishing, and then I saw a magazine come out. This one, actually, May of 1994. I was living in Colorado, guiding in Alaska, and I said, man, I want to go where that place is, where there's no people and giant rainbows. And 3 years later, I was working at Cedar Lodge on the Japanava River, and Fort Katmai Lodge. It was quite an experience going over there in the late 90s. Kamchatka was really wild. We were there in 98 when they defaulted on their IMF loans. I think that's what it was, and the ruble just cratered overnight, and it was very difficult to buy anything. So it's gotten much better over the years. It's interesting. Expensive chopper ride. I wonder how many times I've heard that. Yeah, they're expensive. So everyone hears about mouse fishing on Kamchatka, and it is by far, on a day in, day out, probably the most effective way to catch trout on the peninsula. Over the years, there's been a pretty big change in the mice that have been used over the years. I mean, this is one of the original mice from 1997. And there's something that's true about that mouse. It was tied on a Chimco 8089. Probably it looks like a 4. And we used that style of mouse with rubber legs for a long time, and it evolved a little bit differently. But the problem we noticed many years ago was hook mortality. So here you're fishing this beautiful, incredible wilderness stream in the middle of Kamchatka, and you kill one fish, maybe two fish, maybe a few fish. And, really it's a responsibility that struck home to me very hard. And so I think it was about 15, 16 years ago when I first started the Best of Kamchatka, I implemented a hook restriction. And, that actually forced us to change things, and we went to almost all 6s or smaller. But it was a while before the evolution of the mouse changed. And, really the least lethal one that came out was the Mr. Hankey. Super, super great fly for not injuring fish. And then the Moorish 2.0, another super effective fly for not injuring the fish. I personally tie something that's a little bit different than that. I just haven't clipped the hook, but this is a finished one like I tie. Sometimes I tie with less fur, and I'll trim some of this fur off the tail here. But no deer hair. And more fur than this one. One of the major differences in my mouse and then I think it looks like the Morse 2.0 is tied with wire, but I like the longer sticking back of the Mr. Hankey, but I tie mine with wire. So I'm going to go through all the stuff that I use for the mouse, but just talking about it, the one problem I do see, because these are high volume fisheries, is we catch a whole bunch of a trout with big teeth. So what happens is this amnesia, I think it is, can get broken. And all of a sudden you'll be missing fish, missing trout. What's going on? There's no hook. So a few years ago, I started tying it with the same thing with wire. It's a little bit different than Mr. Hankey though. I like to use beetle-on wire, stainless steel, and I like to get the 0.018 inch or 0.46 millimeter. And then I like to use any of these hooks. This is fine, even though it's a saltwater hook, it's a good hook. Again, lots of use. Or an octopus up eye, or even this saltwater hook. And the reason I like these little bit heavier hooks, actually, than as opposed to the octopus, is I can file on them. So you start catching a lot of fish, the guy's whacking this big fly behind him on the rock, and hello, Nova Scotia. Boy, there's all kinds of people chiming in. Nice. And so I like hooks that are going to last a long time, because ultimately it takes a while to tie any of these flies, and we're going to do high volume catching. So I want them to be tough and durable and really get in there. One of the interesting things is also, I don't know if he's on here, but he tied this one, and there's a whole pile of guess mice, because guests bring mice and hand me mice all the time. And like this one is tied with spider wire, and you can see the hook drops like that. I don't think it's nearly as effective as a hook that sticks up and is a little bit firmer. Also, there's lots of stuff where guys will tie these mice, and there'll be all kinds of rubber legs and all kinds of stuff, and big hooks. Big hooks are no, but extra stuff on trailing hooks, the more stuff you have back there, the more likely you are to have problems with snagging it up, because we do a lot of casting and a lot of catching. So I like to keep it very, very simple. So I'm going to jump right into tying a mouse here. There's a few other things. There's so much to say about Kamchatka. So people ask me, I have this magazine from 26 years ago. I switched lodges, went there, and really have never looked back. I mean, Kamchatka really blew me away, and so ultimately, there's not much to these mice. Beetle-on, rabbit strips, zonker rabbit strips. I like natural colors. This is a little bit different one. Natural colors soak up a lot of water, flop down on the water harder. Rubber legs. I think I am on the last of my round rubber legs, and I bought some other kinds. I don't think it really makes a difference. so much, but I do like rubber legs out there jiggling around. You can see some of these older ones that have been chewed to shreds by the trout have, kind of longer rubber legs. And so really that's it for that. And then the big debate, and it's really not much of a debate for me, is 2-3 mil or 6 mil. So I like 6 mil. It floats really high. It's pretty tough. It makes a bigger silhouette. I prefer 3 millimeter foam for all my mice. But 6 works good too. 2 I think is a little soft and doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't push the water nearly as much as a 3 mil foam does. So, the question lots of people ask, and one thing about the mouse is I don't think it matters if it's brown or tan. Sometimes black foam top, like the Moorish 2.0 and the Moorish, works super good. I think you can't go wrong with any of those 3. So when I do the beetle on the hook, one of the other reasons I like these saltwater hooks is they're straight eye as opposed to up eye. And I don't know if people know how to do this, but we learned at Katmai Lodge when we were snelling hooks for cheaters. So you put it through, make a loop, grab through, and we'll see how smooth I am at doing this. I haven't done all that many lately. And you loop it around, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. Pull that tag in. You want to hold that though. I just lost it. And then pull the other end. And hopefully I got it. Yep, pretty good. And then I grab a pair of pliers, pull it pretty tight. If it's got a little kink in it, it doesn't really matter. And then cut it off. So now that's on there pretty good. It's got a little kink in it. That's because I'm bent over. I'm not doing it the way I normally do. So anyway, I like to snell it, clip it all off. And the reason is, like I said earlier, we're going to catch a lot of fish on this fly. And I want it to be durable. And that wire is far more durable than monofilament. The other part of the equation, the front hook, lots of guys will use all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's shanks, tubes. You could do it with the tube if you wanted to. I bought a bunch of these. I don't know where in the world, at like some thrift shop. I still have, I've had them for 20 years. I must have bought a whole box of them. So I use these as my front shank. It's a great big old bass bug fly hook that I'm just never going to use. And you can use other long shank hooks. We've gone completely away from long shank hooks. So once you have all your materials, you have your hook snelled. I use Danville's. It's big A+ or plus master. It's heavy, strong thread that you want to, crank everything down tight. To get ready for this, I watched a few videos. I watched Craig Matthews tie compare done, which was really cool. And actually learned a few things. So this is going to be the front of the hook. This is going to be the foam, and in different sizes, different widths. do a little bit different things. What you don't want to do is have it too small in the front. I'd rather have it too tall in the front and be able to trim it while I'm on the river than have it too short and not be able to fix it. So this piece, I don't know, I must have been doing something else, is a little wide for me. So I'll trim it, half that of the scissors, and then I'll trim a little V in it to tie it in, try and get it straightish. And there you go. So that foam is ready. The hook is ready. Tie the hook on. And one of the nice things about the wire is it's interesting because I watched someone else tie with wire the other day, and they were talking about going through the eye of the hook with it. Some people do, apparently. I'm of the ilk, I just wrap back on it. And now I'm going to wrap back on it a bunch of times. That's going to be pretty strong. Sometimes I'll hit it with some some super glue. I mean, actually, you can get away without doing it if you tie it on there tight, and I'm pulling really hard all the time, and that hook's going to stick back there nice. And you can have it stick back a little bit farther than this particular one, but I think that's about right. The fish are going to come up and they come down on it and bite it. And so it's not, you just want it not drooping and hanging around. If you do it without wire too, it'll catch on itself. It'll be always catching on itself everywhere. And that's no fun, boy. Nothing more frustrating than being out on the middle of a Kamchatka river and you're messing with your fly. I'll throw it in the bushes before I'll mess with it very much. Maybe a little super glue, just to be a little bit. And so, seems like a lot of work for just having that, but it's really not much. Take a piece of rabbit strip, maybe about as long as the tail you want the tail to be, and I kind of peel a little of fur off of there so I can get to the leather really good, and then crank that down and make it nice and tight. You can see I've got a little extra glue on there, and it doesn't have to be immaculately perfect. The reason I tie the tail in is because you want to tie this in next. And if you tie in the rabbit and leave it hang and then you go around it, sometimes it'll give you the business right there. So I tie in my 3mm foam, and there's nothing wrong with leaving as much foam there as you want. And since we're going to clip that bottom hook, it doesn't really matter where you tie it on the hook. It's funny. It's a little crooked. Okay, so I'm very unlikely to untie. I'm going to finish a fly no matter what happens. So now you can use the same, you can use different. I'm going to use a little bit different because this Palmer's a little bit better. Tie that strip in, and you can see I'm putting a lot of wraps on everything and really pulling tight and making sure that it's a tough fly. We all learned to Palmer marabou or Palmer rabbit in Alaska, working at Katmai Lodge, because we were required to give all our guests all their flies all season long. And I guided every day from June 8th until October 4th one year. I don't know how many nights I stayed up tying flies. So you get really, fast at tying, palmering rabbit, because basically my roommate there, BC, his guest got for salmon one fly, a Charisse palmered rabbit strip. That's all they were allowed to get. Here you go. That was your fly, and it caught the salmon. So now you've got your foam there. It's about, long enough that it's going to be a little too tall, but that gives me some option of trimming it. I'd rather have the option of trimming it than tie it in and have it be too short. So then I'll palmer the rabbit up and pull it back. And the real key is just to keep pulling everything and keep it nice and tight. And so you're going to have a good strong fly, maybe 3 or 4 wraps. This is pretty narrow rabbit. And I tie it off because I'm going to put my rubber legs right here, a little bit towards the front of the shank of the, just past halfway. So I like to put two rubber legs on. So each side is going to have 4 rubber legs. And lots of guys do different things. I just do that because it makes a nice uniform looking fly, and you can, and I think it looks really sexy. So I don't know if guys know that I've always fought with rubber legs. They've given me the devil. So I pinch them around it and then place it where I want it. And then tie it down. And I don't know how many times I've clipped off the one that I have already tied on the fly. That's one time I will take a fly apart a little bit, is if I clip my rubber legs. So you get them in there pretty tight, get them kind of how you want, even on each side of the shank. So they're coming off the side of the shank, and then tie them down good. Right? And clip that off. I just leave them together, and then they'll split apart later. Now, wrap the rabbit over. And in front, makes them stick up a little bit. Another one. Maybe even another one. It's kind of light rabbit. It's okay. So one of the reasons I like using rabbit instead of deer hair is because it sinks. It soaks up water, and it gives it a neutrally buoyant profile in the water. Ah, look at that. I just cut my my thread. I'm not going to lose it, though. It'll soften it up a little bit, but so now with that neutrally buoyant, it soaks up water. When I'm teaching, now I'm going to talk about it in a second, when I'm teaching people how to fish mice, or show, the way I like to fish it is I want that mouse to hit the water like a splush. Yeah, it is cross-cut rabbit or zonker. Zonker rabbit works better. This one is Zonker strips. You can use either one. Whatever you like to palmer. Really, the key is just to get a lot of hair on there. I don't trim any of it. I don't mess with it. I'll peel it, push it down maybe evenly on the sides. That leather on there will soak up water. So when it hits, like a mouse would hit, it's going to be, even if it's walking through the tundra, it's probably, it's got some weight to it. So it hits the water, and you want to make a splash with it. Now, the other thing about fishing Kamchatka for sure is you want your mouse to kiss the bank. If you can throw it on the bank and drag it in hard off the bank, that's the best. But if you can swap it down right on the bank, it's one of the reasons I like some of the softer rods, and let it hit the bank. And then the key with mouse fishing, and I've seen it in videos and I've seen a lot of guys do it, is they go like this. They want to jiggle it, right? Boy, jiggling is not the way to fish a mouse. The best way to fish a mouse is to quarter down, hit the water, and then slow chugs. It's the slow chug that gets the fish bloop, bloop, to come after it. And one of the things that is absolutely true about mice in Kamchatka, it catches the biggest fish. The biggest fish I've caught on Kamchatka, 31.5-inch rainbow. I mean, it's monster rainbow. I caught right behind somebody fishing a big articulated flesh fly like this, almost like that. And so one of the interesting things about Kamchatka is I take 4 spools of tippet with me to Kamchatka. I take 15-pound Maxima Ultra Green, 12-pound Maxima Ultra Green, 10-pound Maxima Ultra Green, and then 2X for dry flies. Maybe someone will hand me some 3X during the summer, but most of the time when I am fishing mice, I'm using 15 or 12-pound Maxima Ultra Green. Short leaders, I'll stick with 6-foot leader, and I'll chop back a leader and so that it marries up with 15-pound Maxima Ultra Green. And then I'll make a total length 6 feet, 7 feet, maybe. Depends on the caster. But 6 feet works perfect. And that allows you to also turn that fly over and let it hit the water really hard, which I'll preach over and over and over again, is you want that thing to whop down on the water, and be ready. Also, I think one of the key factors with mouse fishing is once that fish fly, if you can get it to hit the water really hard, boy, a lot of times those trout, they'll see it. I don't know if they see it, but they'll hear it and they'll come blazing after it. I personally think the 7-weight rod is a perfect rod for Kamchatka. We use floating lines on all our programs, and it's really very, very, very simple equipment. Not a bunch of sink tips or stuff like that. We just don't use it. We use only floating lines. One of the first words I learned in Russian was "chista," clear, because one of my frustrations, the first river I worked on, the Zhupanova, has some, it can get a little dirty. But it has great big trout in it, but it can get a little dirty. And so we went and fished a river on the west coast in 98, called the Kolpakova. We landed, and our guys, we had 6 really good fishermen. Our guys, the 6 Alaska, super, a lot of experience mousing Alaska. Those guys, I think before we had the rafts blown up, had hooked 100 rainbows. That day, we hooked 600 rainbow. Everyone was fishing, the guides, the clients. I mean, everywhere you threw a mouse, there's a rainbow. We went back the next week. It was my 31st birthday, actually. We did an overnight float with a woman named Marn Hornblower. She was 85 years old and did an overnight float in the middle of the wilderness, Kamchatka, in a rainy, cold September. My 31st birthday, they said, just go fish. Well, there's so many fish. And it's the only time in my life I landed 100 rainbows on a mouse that day. It was miserable, actually, because it's just a ton of work. But I wanted to say I did it. The mousing in some rivers on Kamchatka can be so spectacular. I mean, there are guests that come every year that don't fish anything else but mice. They only fish mice. They'll fish dry flies too. And I think one of the things that is important about Kamchatka that the general public may not know is the amount of microinvertebrate biomass. There's so many bugs hatching all the time that the fish look up constantly. The rainbows look up constantly. So, even dry flies. I saw a really big rainbow caught on the West Coast River. The guy who used to be the governor of Nevada went with Ouzel Expeditions about this 29-inch rainbow, and all he used was a humpy all week. And this is really what is so fascinating about Kamchatka, because if you look at some of the videos, there are no hex hatches. There are no hexes, but there are lots. There's times I'll see 4 or 5 different species of mayflies on the water at the same time. So anyway, I'm going to get back to tying this fly real quick. So we got this thing all laid out. Looks good. You put the foam over the top. And here's where, if it's too wide, which this one is verging on too wide, it can be a little bit tough to tie down. But I get it tied down right like that. Leave yourself some room up front. And then I want to tie it down pretty good. Get it nice and tight. Get it as straight as you can make it. And then push it up like that. And then wrap a bunch of wraps right in front of that foam and up against that foam. And you want to make it so that foam sticks up like that and doesn't have the tendency to fall over. You want it to stay up like that. So you have to I pull the thread into the face so it almost makes it cupped like that, and pull it in there. So it's Flymaster Plus. I don't like that denier. It's too sharp. It cuts the foam. So I would rather have regular thread. The real key is to then make sure that sticks up real good there. Finish it off with the whip. Ow. It's a sharp hook. And that's pretty close to done. Because I will like uniformity, I'll grab the rubber legs after I'm done. And then, it seems a little wasteful, but I'll cut to the shortest one. And now you have that great big hook up front, which I will immediately clip off. And you don't need to worry about the back hook getting cut off, but if that's sharp. I will hit it with a file sometimes, but with the wire it doesn't really matter. And then you can see the front profile has even a little cup right there. And that might be a little bit tall. So I will trim it just a smidgen so it's nice. You can even trim a little bit, I'm not gonna do much. That would be it. And that fly, when it soaks up water, will now sit down in the water column slightly, and then you can get it to go bloop, bloop, which is really what you want it to do. One of the things about this fly that I have some issue with is it doesn't soak enough water up. And if you're fishing any faster water, like in July in Kamchatka when the water temps are up and you want to, the trout will move into the faster riffles and things, this has a tendency to skip around on the surface. This particular one, the Morse 2.0, it's a great fly, actually, and I do use wire. I think it's a little short there, but it works really good. The only thing I do with this fly is I trim those babies completely off, which gives you a narrower profile, but also it doesn't allow the fly to spin like a top in the wind, which is one of the things about my particular mouse, is it's going to have enough mass that with the water in it, and most of it shakes out, but it has enough mass that it doesn't tend to spin. And then when you're using 12 and 15 pound Maximum Ultra Green, you're unlikely to spin it, to have it spin in the air. And then again, I have a pocket knife, a real sharp knife with me. If it does spin, you can trim it back a little bit. I'll tell you, one of the funniest stories is I worked at the fly shop in Redding, California for a while, and we had these guys tied this. This was the original Blair Mouse project, and I sent them 12 flies that looked exactly like that. See that big face on it? Just like the one I just tied, except this is like a 20-year-old fly. And we got back that. Didn't work. See, this is too small. But I will say something about Kamchatka and smaller mice. Even though I personally like to tie bigger mice and like a bigger profile mouse, I do think a smaller mouse like these guys work pretty good. But I think it is more to do with the fact that there are lots of caddis and stoneflies more than mice. And I think, you got a little waking October caddis, which are in every river in Kamchatka, dichotomous big old caddis going around in August and September. You're going to see those fish come after littler mouse patterns pretty darn well. But when you get the bigger mouse pattern, and I mean, there's some big mouse patterns that I've used over the years. The fish take them much differently. They're super aggressive takes where they'll come up and do the toilet bowl swirl on the mouse instead of just a grab. Those are real exciting, and I think that percentage-wise, those kind of takes go up when you use a bigger silhouette mouse. I'm a big fly guy just in general, and while I'm on here, I'm talking about the mouse. I wanted to take a second to talk about some of the other stuff we tie for Kamchatka, like these crazy flesh flies. It looks like you wouldn't need that, but one of the things that's true about the rivers in Kamchatka, like the Ozernaya, where we have our jet boat camp, is 2019, the last time we were there had to be 10 million salmon in the river. So if anything we have is the fish are super, they look like me after a big meal. They're fat and full, and you sometimes have to make them want to come get the fly. So I, a lot of times, will use bigger flies, big, long, articulated flies like that. A lot of people can't believe it when I put this on their trout rod, but this particular fly is probably one of my favorite flies, big lead eyes on it. But you can throw that perfectly on a floating line, and boy, the rainbows of Kamchatka will gobble that up. One of the other things that makes Kamchatka so fascinating for me is so you have mice, you have flesh eggs, and I talked about the the mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies, and you also have tons of smolts. So I like big, flashy smolt patterns. Someone asked a question. Big, flashy smolt patterns. Really, boy, every rainbow in Kamchatka will come gobble up a big smolt pattern. A question that was asked, do I find that rainbows are more likely to eat mice than others? I honestly have spent most of my career fishing in Alaska and Kamchatka for rainbows. So I fished a lot for browns around the world and around the country, but it doesn't seem like I pick up the mouse. One of the interesting things about Kamchatka mousing is I actually think it works the best bright sunny days. Beautiful high sky days. You've had barometric pressure sitting pretty steady for a couple days, and you are going to have mouse attack. And really, I find that it's challenging to get browns to come out in the middle of the sunshine. So, I've caught, but I live right outside Boulder, Colorado, and right on Boulder Creek in the city of Boulder, I caught about a 15-inch brown skating a mouse a couple years ago. When's the best time to come to Kamchatka? Well, so that is a great question. It depends a little bit on what you want, and I can break down the seasons. We usually start mid-July. And Kamchatka has huge mountains, so you have big runoff. So if you come earlier than that, there'll be no leaves on the trees. It's still snow on the banks, and you can have runoff and high water. So we've always started mid-July is about perfect. We've fished all the way into October, late September. It depends on the flights out of Anchorage. So really mid-July to mid-September is the optimum time. It does change. The season changes significantly. The first few weeks prior to any salmon coming in the river, you're going to see the rainbows are eating smolts, mice. During the first couple weeks, we'll use smolts, mice, and dry flies. That's it. Then once the salmon start moving in, what happens on Kamchatka is like the Osranaja, chums and kings and stuff will start coming up and sockeyes. And we only fish maybe 40 miles of a 120-mile river. And so there are tons of trout that move up with those rainbows, or tons of rainbows that move up with those salmon from the lower Osranaja and move up into Tuyurt where we do our float trip. And so they, the first few weeks, it's, you could really mouse pretty much the whole time. The first few weeks, I like throwing big flashy flies too, because you get to see the fish chase them. Then once the salmon come in, the fish, we don't really fish right on top of the salmon all that much. We certainly never, ever, ever use a bead rig or an indicator rig or nymphing, never. Once that happens, you got to entice them a little bit more. You can still catch them on mice so really well. It's just not quite as good as earlier. So then we'll start throwing bigger streamers like that. I think one of my favorite stories about Kamchatka is I was walking on the Osranaja. We will walk the John boats down the river and have the two guests will be in the boat, and they'll be casting from the boat at the banks, and I'm walking by a big chum salmon red, and I look up against the bank, and there's a 2-foot rainbow sitting there sitting right behind a female spawning chum, and she starts shooting eggs, and that rainbow goes up and grabs a mouthful of eggs and sits back down against the green grassy bank. And my guest and I are watching as he's up higher than me. He can see it better than I can. And I said, "You see that?" He says, "Yeah." And just as that happened, here comes a yellow mayfly, just a beautiful yellow mayfly. That same rainbow does a head and tail, just a perfect rise. And I said, "Okay, man." And he's got a big mouse on his rod, and he wings that mouse in there, and here comes that big rainbow on the mouse. So they're super opportunistic, and really, that's one of the reasons they're so prolific and so big and so healthy. And so then sometime around mid-August, the flesh fly bite will really crank up, and that's when I'll start using stuff like this in big holes. I mean, it's one of my favorite bites of the year, a big flesh fly bite. They come up and just whoosh, and they're really fat and great, and it seems like more fish show up maybe in August, mid-August, but I don't know if they are. I think maybe they're just the eggs have dried up a little bit, and so they're getting a little hungry. Fall's coming a little bit, and then in later August, we'll also see what looks like a western green drake, a big mayfly, and some yellow mayflies will start coming off in mid to late August, all the way into mid-September. You can have a baetis, a pretty good-sized baetis coming off. And these rainbows, because they, if you look on a lot of the videos, you'll see the aquatic plant in the water. It's called a buttercup. It's a buttercup species. And basically, if you're on Kamchatka and if you see buttercup, there's going to be a lot of rainbow trout in that river. Wow, good question. How do I set the hook when I'm fishing mouse? Well, I can tell you, I'm tight to the fly. I am rod low. I've got no slack at all to the fly. I'm chugging maybe a little bit or maybe a short strip, and then it's just a solid set over your opposite shoulder. So if you're casting and the fly is drifting and you're chugging this direction and the fish grabs it, you set over. If it's going to the right, you set over your left shoulder. You can do it over your right shoulder, but you got to come out like this. That's a little harder. I like to come across. If you're fishing it the other way, then I come across this shoulder. The set is always solid, sharp, almost like you're casting the fly with a tight elbow. You know, the biggest mistake I see guys make is the double set. That double set with the mouse is a kiss of death. I would rather have guys hold it there for a second, because sometimes those fish will turn on it and almost set themselves. This is one of the reasons why we went away from big hooks and went to the smaller hook, octopus hook, is because a lot of times those fish, they'll have it underwater swimming away before you even know. And if you got a big hook, it'll drop down in their gills before you even know. And then what happens is you can see the fish coming in, and that fly is down there, and the fish is going to be doing this with a big open mouth. And that's a mortally injured fish, perhaps, or a fish that knows that it's in trouble. And so that's one of the reasons we switch to using nets. We don't if my guides are all trained that if you can't see the fly and the mouth, if the fish is coming in and you got to see an open mouth like that, you don't touch the fly line. You don't touch the leader. You don't touch it. You net that fish. And then a lot of times you can reach down in there, and if you haven't pulled on the line, you haven't broken a gill yet. And so then you can push it out, boop, and maybe there's a little puncture, but it's not a torn gill. And torn gills, when we were back in the day, when we used to tie all of our streamers on great big 6 extra long, I don't even think I have anymore out anywhere, but 6 extra long shank streamer hooks, boy, it was really hard on the fish. So again, when you set the hook for a mouse, it's not the double set. It's rod tip low, line tight, one solid set across the body, opposite of the way you're swinging the fly. Barbless, sure, but we use barbless more because you can't get the hook out of you. One of the worst I ever saw was I had a mouse tied on a wire, right? And one of the guides, the fish ate it, and then it somehow sewed its way through, and it got in the guide's hand, and he's got this 4-pound rainbow flopping and a wire hook, and they had to get. It was a mess. I imagine that trout maybe didn't survive, but really having the wire makes a big difference when it comes to longevity of the fly. Against the gill plate, yeah. So really, on it, that's just a little bit of a thing about mousing. I'll end it with probably my favorite keepsake from Kamchatka. Well, maybe my second favorite. It's a piece of Russian ballistic missile, and some bear memorabilia, but I have a kind of wall of fame of mouse patterns from over the years. And one of the most interesting ones was the Verminator. It's a big Verminator. But they have terrible hooks on them. They kill every trout. But I kept one of these on a rod in my boat for years without a hook on it. And I never did land a fish, but I got close. And really, everyone should want to go to Kamchatka. They don't have to come with us. We certainly would like to earn people's business, but it is a spectacular wilderness. It is so much more than people can imagine. Those bear teeth were from a bear we shot outside a camp in 2013. Big monster. He was trouble. 7-weight rod. I like 7-weight. 6 is okay. With Kamchatka being what it is, you could have a 30-inch rainbow on the end of a 6-weight rod, and you don't have enough rod. One of the biggest trout I ever lost on Kamchatka was because I had broken my 7-weight, and I was fishing a 6. It was just I remember my buddy was running with the net, and I couldn't get it, and the trout is rubbing his face. I mean, it was like a 32-inch. 7-weight. 7-weight's the right rod. 32-inch rainbow, and I lost him. It was 14-pound rainbow. He was a monster. But if I would have had a 7, maybe I could have turned him. But he had me right at my feet. So anyway, I'm trying to end this at 56 minutes so that I can. My company's name is The Best of Kamchatka. You can look it up on. I have a really. Big website. We have 3 programs on the peninsula, The Best of Kamchatka, and I don't have enough to gnarly bear story to finish. Well, boy, there's a lot of crazy bear stories. I love bears, by the way. I think they're a super cool animal. Probably the scariest was one time I was on the Kolpakova, went way down a big back channel, and had left my guests at the top of it and said, fish down there. I'm going to go look at this little creek that comes in, because I love going up creeks, because the salmon go up the creeks and then the trout go up the creeks, and you got these great big trout up these creeks, and you can go in there and have some cool sight fishing. And I get up and down from them, half a mile, go up the creek. maybe 300 yards, and there's this monster bear sitting in the middle of the river with a chum in his mouth, sitting there. He drops the chum, gets up, and starts walking towards me, and I'm yelling, "Hey, hey, hey, stop!" And he didn't stop. He kept coming, and I turned around. I don't run, and I come. He went from being 300 yards away to being 30 yards away by the time I came around the corner into the main channel, and my two guys are standing there. And there he said, "Hey, Will, there's a huge bear right behind you." And I said, "I know." And just when they said that, the bear saw all three of us and he boogied away. But if I'd have been alone, he probably would have eaten me. Okay, so I'm going to end it right now, guys. I appreciate it. Best of Kamchatka. Anyone can talk to me anytime. I like to talk. So be well. I really appreciate everybody who came. Have a great day.